This is Live from the Table, the official podcast of New York's world-famous Comedy Cellar, coming at you on Sirius XM 99 Raw Dog and on the Laugh Button Podcast Network. Dan Naturman here with Periel Aschenbrand, and we are in the studio at the Comedy Cellar. And, of course, Noam Dworman, the owner of the Comedy Cellar, is here. We also welcome Raanan Hershberg, who is a Comedy Cellar regular. As of when, Raanan? How long have you been regular?
I got in right before the pandemic, so I've been in for, I guess, a year and a half or 4 months.
Well, he's a relative newcomer. We'll leave it at that. Considering, you know, let's face it, there's some dinosaurs here at the Comedy Cellar, and
I'm talking to one.
Raanan Hershberg's credits include The Late Late Show with James Corden, Comedy Central podcast with Joe. He has a podcast rather with Joe List called Joe and Raanan Talk Movies. I know that Doug Benson has a movie podcast, so I don't know how you feel about his podcast or whether
it's just us two. We're the only two movie podcasts.
Just you, the only two, or the only two worth mentioning. Anyway, by the way, I got an email. We all got an email from Liz Fariati, the general manager of the Comedy Cellar, saying that we're going to full capacity. What's the date now?
May 30th, May 31st, right?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think I deleted
June 1st to May 31st.
Well, it's very soon. And with the you had to have present your Vax card at the door, I guess. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And is there any mandate from the city as to how as to whether you need to verify how you verify the vaccination? These cards look pretty forgeable to me, quite frankly.
No, we don't. I mean, it hasn't been very. No, we haven't. We haven't gotten much guidance at all. Reminds me of the old days of fake IDs, you know.
I mean, you can literally create one of these in like Photoshop. You
know how to use Photoshop, Periel?
I actually do know how to use Photoshop. Noam. I also know how to use Illustrator.
Let's see. Let's do a little like a Comedy Cellar challenge. Let's see you do it. Let's see you do a fake Vax card for next week. And
whether or not Periel can do it is not the issue. The issue is people can do it. Whether they're going to make that sort of an effort to see a comedy show, I don't know. I'm
just feeling ornery. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if I make that kind of effort for a comedy show. But who knows?
Why are you feeling ornery?
Just I don't know, a lot of stuff, a lot of stress.
I mean, give us something.
Nothing in particular. Just I don't know. You know, sometimes I think it's just a biorhythm. Sometimes you just feel stressed. Sometimes you don't. But I'm fit to be tied right now.
Well, one wonders how we ever feel other than stress, given the precariousness of our situation. That is to say, the march of time toward the inevitable grave. But anyway, let's lighten things up a bit. I invited Raanan on for a specific purpose. Raanan, I think you probably know why I invited you on.
I assume it has to do with Israel. I feel like I'm going to get sandbagged here.
No, you're not going to get sandbagged, but I did want to discuss the post that you made, which is Raanan made...
Maybe teabagged. We'll see about sandbagged.
Teabagged. All right.
Well, Raanan, and I commented on the post, but Raanan made a post on Instagram that's gotten so far...
Isn't it Raanan?
Yeah, Raanan. Well, it can go either way. It's Hebrew.
Raanan.
He's feeling bold.
It's actually Raanan.
Yeah, you got to have you got to be able to make a guttural sound to correctly pronounce my name. I can't do it. It's like Raanan. Yeah, Periel, you got it, kind of.
Raanan made a post on Instagram that caught my attention, and it's at 793 likes, which I must say, given the number of followers you have, is a fairly robust like-to-follower ratio. It's about 1/6 of your followers have liked.
I feel like that's a backhanded compliment right there.
No, because I have even less followers. You have to judge the amount of likes in relation to the amount of followers you have.
Yeah, of course, yes.
So you have more followers than I do, so it's by no means a backhanded compliment. I mean, neither of us have hundreds of thousands.
It's just funny the way you said it. You're like,
anyway,
700, which is a huge portion of the small amount.
So in other words, no. Well, it's a robust number compared to me anyway, you know. But so it got a lot of likes now and a lot of comments that are very, very positive. But I don't want to read it unless Raanan authorizes me or unless he wants to read it himself. Or
Well,
unless
I do want to say it was a joke. I feel like no one's. I feel like it has not been called a joke. It's not been labeled a joke. It might not be that funny to you, but it was a joke.
It was quite witty, but
Okay, yeah. Well, we just haven't said it. You know, like I wasn't making like some. I don't make big like. I'm not, I don't. I think you should have a quota of one serious post a year, and I wait for
but I
like
think
an
it was
animal
taken
to die or
seriously.
something.
Like
What?
I think it was taken seriously. Like what?
You
One
gotta
thing-
read it. You gotta read it because people are listening to a show here. Come on.
I'm not going to read unless Raanan authorized me to read his.
Listen, if he doesn't authorize you to read it, then
You-
we just
yeah,
stop
yeah,
the whole
yeah.
thing and throw him out.
You could, yeah, read it, Dan. You have a.
Imagine listening to this and then he find out he's not going to read it. Like, the fuck did I listen to this show for in the first place?
I will read it unless
Read
we're
it.
supposed to read it, but I will read it. Dear
Sure.
people asking me about Israel just because I'm a Jew. All I know about Israel is that I got my first blowjob there on Birthright when I was 16 years old. I should probably mention that Birthright's a program where Jewish kids get sent to Israel.
Don't butcher my jokes with the fucking fact.
Christ, Dan.
That is the limit of my knowledge of Israeli foreign policy. Please leave me alone. And then this is a postscriptum of sorts. The blowjob was from
An asterisk. It's an asterisk.
Asterisk, yes. The blowjob was from a girl who was actually dating some other dude, but I just swooped in. Though no one seemed to care because I had been bullied for so long before that, like for as long as anyone could remember, so people thought I deserved to win. And then that dude tried to fight me, and I kicked his ass, and everyone was like, well, he has a right to defend himself. But then I kept on kicking the dude's ass over and over and over again, and people were like, this is a little awkward. I think the guy getting bullied has now officially become the bully. Anyway, that's all I know. That I got my first blowjob on Birthright when I was 16. I don't have any opinion on the matter. Please leave me alone. And I assume our listeners understand the metaphor.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand, he's making a metaphor about Israel. Israel, he's comparing to himself that he stole a guy's girlfriend. The guy kicked his ass, tried to kick his ass, but he kicked the guy's ass. But since he was bullied for so long, he deserved to win. But then he kept continuing to kick the guy's ass, and now he, the bullied, had become the bully. So that is an analogy.
So missiles are like a blowjob? I'm not sure I get it.
So first of all, Raanan,
It's not the perfect metaphor.
I want to clarify: is this your position on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, or you're just going for the laugh?
I think the joke here, and it's probably not a great one. I wrote a lot of Israeli jokes. This one got, in the last week or two. But I think ultimately the joke is more about me or an American Jew kind of not getting mad that they're always having to defend Israel, but also kind of wanting to say that there's a lot about Israel they don't like, but being afraid to say it out loud too at the same time. So if anything, it's more of an expression of the moral crisis of my generation of American Jews, But I mean, it's obviously a complicated situation.
Hey, Raanan, and I'm very, very fond of you, both comedically and personally.
Mm-hmm.
That I actually found it disturbing, the post disturbing. Because, and I'm just being honest, because I felt that you were saying in a witty way, but you were saying that basically Israel is the bully of the region, and furthermore, many people seem to be on board.
But Israel got the blowjob.
Yes.
Let's talk about the blowjob.
He's really stuck on the blowjob.
So I was like, oh, Israel, what? Anybody gets the blowjob. Anyway, go ahead.
If anything, it's very offensive because I'm using a girl as a metaphor for like land. So it's quite a problematic post, really. I think let me just I don't know that much. I'm trying to learn more. But a lot of people don't, I know probably more than some, but I'm a fucking idiot, but I still want to be able to do jokes about whatever I want, but I do think Israel there's always been this tension between what it does for survival, which is valid, and what it does in its tactics that go beyond survival into some kind of domination or an asymmetric war. And it's always kind of skirted that tension. And I do think in many ways Israel has, and once again, I'm an idiot. And if you throw facts at me, I'll probably just, bow over. But I think Israel does do things that it's obviously bullying and aggressive. Yes.
So this is interesting. This is not just about you, but I've heard this like 5 times in the last 2 weeks, enough to think that maybe this is becoming a trope. I don't know what it is, but quite often people have been saying, I don't know that much about the situation. It's complicated, but I just feel like, and I'm noticing over and over and over again that people are kind of hiding, they're criticizing Israel and then hiding behind the fact that they don't know that much. Where one might say, if you don't know that much, shut up. What comedian? I don't know that much about string theory, but blah, 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 blah. I know it's very, very complicated. Only some physicists understand it, but blah, but here's my opinion. Well, nobody,
if a comedian could only make a joke on the thing they're an expert about, there'd be no comedy. So but you'd be out of business. But we're not talking about
but this is
joke now. I didn't mind the joke. Huh?
This is different because
let Noam finish his thought.
Well, I thought he was.
I'm just saying that
all the fucking time. Go ahead.
No, I thought you were in the midst of.
I thought he was done.
Well, now you're taking the wind out of my sail. But you're getting into the thing. But listen, let's see how complex it really is. When you fire missiles into another country, is there any situation under which you should be surprised or think it's inappropriate for them to fire back?
Well, so this is a question because I still want to go back to the fact that my thing was a joke, and I do think comedians should be allowed to make jokes, even if I'm not like an expert on.
No, of course you can. I don't mind though. But nevertheless,
we're talking outside of the joke.
But there is something in the joke which is making a point, and it's fine to make a point. I'm not offended by it, but it does kind of skirt what seems to me the intellectually honest price of admission to this conversation, which is if you are a nation and you have missiles being fired at you, asymmetric or otherwise, whether you're more powerful, whatever it is there some scenario where you have to take it, where you're not entitled to fire back? In other words, people making this analogy like would the Second World War have been less immoral if we had allowed like the Japanese to kill more of us before?
These are like false equivalencies, right? So
no, what's false? You're the democratically elected leader of the nation of Israel, and missiles are coming in. Is there some scenario where you shouldn't fire back? That's what I'm asking you. But
the difference between firing back and possibly firing back with some sense of trying to minimize casualties.
No, fire back to the extent that's necessary to make it stop.
Well, they didn't. First of all, they didn't make it stop. They're still firing on both sides. And do you think they have any obligation to not, because obviously when they fire back, they kill way more civilians than have been fired back on Israel. And these are people that they're essentially in an occupied territory. Do you think they have and I don't know too much about foreign policy, but do you think they have no obligation to minimize the death of the people they shot back? Because clearly we saw from this.
They have obligations to try to minimize civilian casualties.
Do you feel like they did?
From what I've read, yes, I do feel like this. As a matter of fact, there was a UN guy who misspoke and actually said that that he thought they did. But the fact is that these missiles come from within civilian areas, and many people say, and I don't even know why I'm putting it this way, but I'll just to be less contentious, there's a pretty credible accusation that human shields are part of the strategy, and
human shields are also used as an excuse. Whether Hamas uses human shields or not, that doesn't mean Israel can just be like, well, they're human shields, so now we're going to kill as many children as possible.
No, I don't know. Listen, obviously, this is where it gets ridiculous. Israel is, as you say, 1,000 times more powerful than Hamas. If it had wanted to kill civilians, there wouldn't be 100, 200 civilians killed, or 100 combatants and 100 civilians. There'd be thousands dead. There's no. Israel has the power to do whatever it wants there. I mean, listen, let's put the shoe on the other foot. If the Iron Dome had gone down for 90 minutes, do you have any doubt that every one of the 14,000 missiles that Hamas would have rained down trying to kill as many Israelis as possible?
Well, they say a cat, when he scratches you, is trying to kill you. but if my cat scratches me, should I throw him out the window because he could have killed me if he was bigger?
Does that mean you think they would have tried to kill as many Israelis as possible, or they wouldn't?
Of course.
Okay.
I'm not.
Now, Israel's not trying to kill as many civilians as possible. If they are, they're really bad at it, considering all the.
But you're conflating Hamas and civilians. Like, just because Hamas wants to kill as many civilians as possible in Israel, doesn't mean that, you know.
Well, let me ask you this then.
Kids from so many children died. There's so many people are not. To conflate Hamas with the citizens of Gaza.
Listen, you're very agile here, but you're ducking basic questions. Which, I mean, when Hamas is sending the missiles into Israel, don't they do it knowing? And by the way, they have no objective here. It's not like they're sending missiles to defend themselves or sending missiles in order to aggressively take land. Or there's just a pure kill civilian. I hate him. And all of a sudden, the leader of the country who's taking incoming shoots back. Now, of course, civilians are going to die. You think there's some scenario where Israel's going to shoot back and civilians aren't going to die? You think Hamas is not fully aware that when they shoot these missiles, that missiles are going to come back and kill civilians? Do you think that they don't also know that the pictures of civilians dying are actually how they achieve victory here? The only like I'm trying to be fair, but the only objective Hamas actually could have here in terms of benefiting from this conflict is the civilian casualties. What other benefit could there be to Hamas?
But that still doesn't justify Israel.
The other benefit potentially is to.
Well, it does. Listen, when America got hit with 9/11. We did 100 times worse when we raided Afghanistan. Nobody said we didn't deserve it. We weren't entitled to it. Barack Obama was droning people in tents years after 9/11. When Germans died in World War II, and I don't mean to compare Palestinian people to Nazis, but I compare Hamas to Nazis. When Germans died in World War II, people blamed their Nazi leaders, not the Allies, for defending. When people died in Japan, people blamed the emperor for getting them into a war with the United States. Normally, when you have an evil leader that sucks your country into a war, the evil leader is the one people are upset with, not the country that fires back.
But excusing something based on what other people did is kind of fallacious. Logically,
I'm giving you a moral. Listen, dude, you live where? In what borough?
Crown Heights.
Okay, it
looks a little like Gaza, honestly.
If you start getting missiles in Crown Heights and your family is going into bomb shelters on 90-second notice, you are going to expect your goddamn leader to fire back until it stops. And if they don't, you're going to vote them right out of office. Everything you're saying will disappear the second you find yourself in a bomb shelter and see your neighbor's apartments being blown up. And by the way, a few of your family's friends being killed. And
that's a false argument. That's like saying
one more thing. We also know Hamas builds no bomb shelters. None. Zero. Right. Why do they do that?
But that still means Israel's had a responsibility to minimize the death of Gaza.
How do you know they're not? How many deaths?
I guess how do you know they are?
Well, why? How many?
Which one is? How do you know we are, and how do they know they're not?
Well, because the number actually, given the power that Israel has and the tremendous amount of retaliation that went on, 200 people dead in listen. In the other countries in the Middle East, when they have battles, you deal in tens and hundreds of thousands of dead. When Iran and Iraq went to war, more people died in one day than in all the Arab-Israeli wars combined on both sides. When there's a civil war in Syria, you have 500,000 dead Syrians. When Israel goes to war against Hamas, you have 200, not civilians, 200 people dead. Some of them are civilians.
But I can't murder 5 people and be like, hey, there was a bomb in Afghanistan.
So what would you do? So what would you do if you were the prime minister of Israel when the missiles come in?
Well, also, first of all, when I say bully, that's like a big umbrella, and you specifically meant with that. I mean, do you not think a joke about Israel being bullying has any weight?
I don't mind your joke.
Okay,
I don't mind your joke. I don't understand. You're taking my fire because.
Do you think just to zoom out into the comedy world for a second? Do you think that at this point, at this juncture in history, and considering what's going on, do you think comedians have any responsibility when they do make jokes? So in other words, assuming it was just a joke, does being just a joke, is that?
I don't think it's just a joke. I mean, obviously, I think Israel is bullying, But I also don't think the question of Israel being bullying, I didn't in the joke specifically say Israel is bullying for this specific reason about firing rockets. I said Israel is bullying. So, I would just mean that's kind of a wide umbrella.
Let me make another point because it's important.
But it's true that neither of us technically know, like, you say they minimized, and I get the feeling that they did not because over 200 people died and 60, 70 children died. So I get the feeling that they did not minimize.
Raanan, how many people? Okay, two things. First, I'm going to say the first thing. I want to get back to what you just said. It's very important here, not for anybody to think that I don't take very seriously the humanitarian tragedy of all this. Children dying. Children are not terrorists. Children are not anything. Children are children, and children dying. As a father and as a friend of Palestinians, this is beyond. It's incomprehensible, the sorrow, and it's impossible. It's impossible emotionally to deal with that. So nothing I'm saying here should in any way.
I'm not saying you. I'm not saying.
Hold on. Nothing I'm saying here should in any way. Be taken to think that I minimize it in any way. Nevertheless, what I'm saying is that if you have 3,000 rockets were fired at Israel from Hamas, how many? Something like that?
Like 4,000. Yeah.
4,000. And these are fired from densely populated areas. And they don't have bomb shelters. And Israel's returning fire. What number of civilians would you have expected where it would have felt right to you that Israel was taking precautions? How do you think they're going to fire back at these missile silos and not have people die?
Not silos, but
or missile
batteries or whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, what? I'm accusing you of extreme bias here because it sounds to me like I would say. If you had told me that 2,000 people died, I wouldn't. That on the face of it, I don't know that much about warfare. I wouldn't say oh, that's ridiculous. 3,000 missiles fired and 3,000 back and 2,000 people died. I mean, I don't know. That was 200 people dying. That sounds like quite a low number.
Compared to Israeli casualties, I think you're.
Why would you compare them? In what war do you? As a matter of fact, I would say wars were.
Well, I think we should compare. I think we should look at asymmetric.
What war?
Wars.
Tell me. Give me an example of any war we've ever done that.
I mean, I do it. I mean, morally judge an asymmetric war.
So America then has been the bad guy basically in every war it's ever fought because
yes.
So World War II. You can because way more Nazis died than Americans. So now you can draw a conclusion about in Japan. My God, even without
World War II is not an asymmetric war. The Nazis were a very powerful army.
Apparently not. They lost.
But the Iraq War, the first Iraq War is very asymmetric. And we killed so many more people. I think you can. I mean, I think there is moral. Well, I think you can look at Israel and Gaza and be like.
So what are you saying that we should that's not what this is what I understand. Pearl Harbor, as it were, that's what defines the war. When rockets come into a country, the leader of that country has to defend that country, and asymmetrical that implies that you have to do it with one hand behind your back.
But we do judge World War.
No citizen will reelect a leader that defends them with one hand behind its back because the other side purposely exposes or stupidly exposes or for whatever reason is just not good at warfare. So they're not good at it. So we have to take more missiles, and that is crazy talk. That's not the way. That's not only is not the way the world works. It is not the way you would want your leader. If your neighborhood were being bombed, you would want it stopped, and you would say, do whatever you got to do to make it stop. I'm getting bombed here.
But we do that with World War II. We judge the firebombing on Dresden. We think that was unnecessary. We think that was
no, that's not true. Dresden we judge because that they were firebombing civilians for the sake of killing civilians.
Well, but in the moment they assumed it was obviously part of the war.
No, the firebombing of Dresden was intentional, trying to inflict civilian casualties. By the way, was the atom bomb.
neither of us are in the Israeli army. Neither of us know, but my interpretation.
The truth between me and you is that I don't know, so I don't.
You don't know either, though. So why?
Listen, you don't make accusations in life unless you do know.
But you don't know either, and you're making accusations.
I'm not making the accusation. The burden of proof is not on me. If you're going to say Israel's targeting civilians, you can't. Your burden of proof is on you to say so. If I say you're a racist, and the reason you were mean to Sherrod Small is because he's black, I have to have something. I have to be able to back that up. I can say, well, that's the feeling I got. So I'm going to say
if neither of us know whether Israel could have done a better job minimizing lives in Gaza, you're saying you have the burden of proof is on me over you?
Of course it is, because you're making the claim.
Well, you're making the claim that they didn't.
No, I'm saying I don't know. It doesn't.
You're saying they didn't. That's different.
No, what I said was I read some articles which seemed to say that they didn't. The number to me, in a common sense way, doesn't seem high. But I'm open. Well, hold on. But I'm open.
Periel
wait, but I'm certainly open to persuasion. If you have a fact, something you read, an expert, an article, some metric of some other wars, even a common something, I'll say, oh shit, maybe he's right. An interview with someone, but just to say you think it's true and you're going to go public with the accusation, I mean, I don't think that's right.
For me, 60 children over 2 children in Israel is asymmetric. Is to me asymmetric. That's my feeling on that.
So Israel should have waited for some more children to die before it had the right to bomb back.
Can I ask a question?
Periel slip in here?
Go ahead.
So
I don't understand the argument.
The only reason that, first of all, I will start by saying, like, any child or civilian, anybody dying is a fucking tragedy. So that's Palestinian, Israeli, anything. And my heart breaks for all of it. The whole thing is so devastating. But to Noam's point, I mean, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law and family are right on the border, and they had bombs raining down on them 24/7 for days on end. They were living in a bomb shelter. And the only reason that most of those people are alive is because of the Iron Dome.
He's making an argument against the Iron Dome.
I'm not making an argument against Iron Dome. Why would you say that?
Because it saves Israeli lives, and your whole argument is based on the fact that not enough Israelis died.
No, I'm saying that because they have an Iron Dome, they can still take into account that Gaza is more defenseless and have an obligation not to kill as many people.
I made the point before that the liberals say that so Iron Dome is 90% effective, so Israel should risk the other 10%. This is from the people who say Pfizer is 97% effective and they still won't take off their masks. You know, like you taking risks. You can't say to your country, if you're a leader, listen, we're going to get 9 out of 10, and we're just going to let the other 1 out of 10 fall wherever it falls. And if some of you killed, well, as long as it's not more than the as Arabs who were killed.
You have to take into consideration, even if it was 100% effective, you're still talking about an assault on the daily life of a population.
Absolutely. But here's my question: where is your anger at the one party here that we know has dirty war criminal hands? You may have a theory about Israel, but the dirty, uncontroversial, undebatable, dirty war criminal hands that are responsible for these children dying is Hamas firing missiles. That is a war crime. They are firebombing Israel the way you complain that we firebombed Dresden. Mm-hmm. Where is your anger with them?
I have anger towards Hamas. I have anger towards Hamas.
Where's your joke about Hamas?
I have jokes. But what you tell me which to? I mean, first of all, there's all just a plan of Dan to get me in trouble with Noam, so I lose spots, so he can get more spots.
You'll probably get more spots now because I like to have someone to argue with. But I'm saying, as it's like, listen, my big beef in this whole conflict is with American Jews who should with pride, and I take pride, take a magnifying glass to Israeli policies and the racism that we know and systemic racism that we know that the Arabs live with, and every aspect of wanting Jews to live by their to live morally and upright. But this extending to a chapter where Hamas is firebombing, I don't get that you can't draw the line between I don't like the way that Arabs are treated with maybe water rights or whatever one of these things, or their schools are not funded, or racism, and saying and therefore I'm going to turn a blind eye to the fact that Hamas that is dedicated to destruction not just of Jews in Israel, Jews everywhere on planet Earth, who calls us whose rhetoric about Jewish people is no different than the rhetoric of the Nazis. The only thing is, this is 2021, and Jews are looking the other way about this.
There's plenty of Jewish nationalists.
While Jews are in bomb shelters, and your argument is that when we fire back to protect ourselves, if we kill, I mean, what do we do this every 100 years and then find ourselves slaughtered again? If we can't stand up for ourselves on something like this, why don't we just put our heads on the chopping block? Let them kill us. We can't defend ourselves when missiles are being fired at us?
I mean, it's also what led up to all this. And it's also, there are plenty of Jewish nationalists who want Arabs off the face of the earth, or at least all Arabs kicked out of Israel. There's plenty of Jewish supremacy to go around.
That's not the official position, God forbid, of Israel, and it's certainly not the official position of any government.
Periel, what are you doing? There is no Jew that wants Arabs off the face of the earth. The worst Jews.
That's what I just said.
No, but it's not you say not the official position. It's not the unofficial position. The worst position that we have to shame us is the Kahana's position, which was expulsion. That is the worst position. Expulsion has already happened in every Arab country of every Jew. Most of these countries have 0 Jews. Some of them have 10 or a dozen. We're in communities that had tens and hundreds of thousands of Jews. But the worst, most shameful position is the Kahana's position, which advocated expulsion. And by the way, Kahana was banned from the Knesset because he was called a racist. So what are you talking about when you say there's plenty of Jews that want to annihilate the Arabs off the face of the earth? Israel could annihilate the Arabs, all the Palestinians, if it wanted to do tomorrow. If that's really what you thought.
All the Jews on planet Earth, there may be some that do take that position. You certainly can't.
I mean, from growing up where I grew up, and the Jewish people I know and the Zionists I know, I don't know what, off the face of the earth, but I know plenty of Jews with a lot of bigotry towards Arabs.
I said that.
A lot of bigotry, yeah.
Oh, yeah, bigotry on one side and genocide. Raanan, what are you talking about?
You're also conflating Hamas with the Palestinian people. Not all the Palestinian people want the Jews to be kicked off.
No, I'm not conflating Hamas. No, as a matter of fact, I think you're conflating the Hamas with the Palestinian people because you're the one refusing to blame Hamas.
I blame Hamas. I blame both sides. I think they're both awful.
No.
Yes.
You blame both sides for the missiles coming into Israel?
I blame both sides for the whole I definitely blame both sides for that. You don't think Israel does the police riots?
Don't complain about Dresden then.
What do you mean?
What's your position on the atom bomb? I mean, I took you to be a guy that thinks it's never okay to target civilians.
I mean, it's the atomic bomb situation is another situation where people can argue back and forth, and some people could be like, well, a million more American soldiers would have died, so it's worth it. And then someone else can say, we don't think that. So it's kind of the same situation. I happen to think Japan was trying to surrender. There's a lot of information saying they were going to surrender, that we should not have dropped an atom bomb. But yes,
listen,
I don't think we should have dropped an atom bomb.
I'm just stunned. But all right. I mean, I'm stunned. It's painful to me. It's actually painful to me to hear somebody of Israeli heritage. But it's painful to me to hear even someone who's not Jewish or Palestinian say such a thing. But it does. I can't lie. It's more painful to me to hear somebody.
I want to just
somebody Jewish so casual about missiles being fired with the intention of trying to kill as many civilians as possible, and then saying we blame both sides. I mean, it's like that's what people did at 9/11. People were like, well, we blame both sides for 9/11. Like anytime there's conflict, you can blame both sides. But
I mean, Israel
You're
occupied the territory, giving it to the point where
you're redefining war crimes. Usually war crimes don't extend the kind of courtesy that you are extending. Usually when one party aims missiles into civilian areas purposely as the targets, that's a crime against humanity.
I would like to.
You want to redefine it now.
I would like to, by the way, apologize to Raanan if he feels sandbagged. I thought
teabagged.
Please know that that your spots will not be affected. I've known Noam for 20 years, and the more he disagrees with you politically, probably the more spots you'll get. But certainly,
but I don't know how Esty. Well, let's make sure nobody tells Esty. That's all right.
No. Well, I was worried. I've been doing a bunch of Israeli jokes. None of those.
No, don't have to worry. This is thank your lucky stars you work for a conservative, because honestly, if you work for at least this is not the way it was years ago, but right now if you work for a conservative, you're much more likely to have somebody who says, I don't care what you say whatever you want.
Right.
But I don't care what you say, but that doesn't mean I don't want to. I can't argue with you. Okay, Misty
Harris. Let me do because I don't get as much airtime as I used to. Once Noam gets on a roll, he stays on that roll. Why are you pointing to that?
It's so upsetting.
I said Misty Harris because my pediatrician had a daughter, Missy Harris. This is going back quite a few years, needless to say.
Your mic is muted. Misty, your mic is muted. Go. Okay, so go ahead, Dan.
Misty, as in play Misty for me, or Misty Mountain Hop if you're a Zeppelin fan. Misty Harris is a trial attorney. Both Noam and I have law degrees. Neither of us are practicing lawyers. She specializes in the defense of clients in entertainment, sports, employment, civil rights, and sex assault abuse cases. Well, that's really running the gamut, I think. And she's an independent legal analyst on a variety of network TV shows. In any case, welcome, Misty, not Missy, Misty Marris.
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
You look like you're in your law office, unless that's some sort of a virtual background.
Nope, this is the library at my office. I don't have this in my home.
Do you still use books, or is that just?
We do still have books. Yes, we have a full library. Anything you want to read. If you want to take a nap.
Is Misty a Jewish name?
It is not. It is not. I am pretty Irish. Although my parents say they picked my name just out of a baby name book. I always get a lot of questions about where it came from. It's very random. They wanted me to have the alliteration.
Misty Marris. I named my kid Benjamin Flash Dworman because I wanted him to have the initials BFD, like big fucking. So, but before we get into other stuff, are you up on Geneva Conventions and rules of conflict and stuff like that? And you have anything to add on the legalities of Hamas firing missiles into Israel?
Sex abuse and entertainment law. Although some might find.
I have a lawyer. I have too. Can I bring in a lawyer on my side?
Please.
All right, we're going to zoom them in. Tell me we can bring lawyers to the debate.
Misty, do you know anything? Do you know anything about that stuff?
That's really not my area of expertise with respect to international treaties. Although, as you pointed out, I run the gambit on quite a few other issues.
Anyway, no, you invited Misty, I assume, for a certain reason.
Well, I heard her commentary about the Chauvin trial when it was going on. But then, that issue seems to have calmed down now. But you and I wanted to get into a little debate about that at the time. But let's go back to it, because is today the anniversary, or yesterday was the anniversary of George.
Yeah, and actually the Chauvin trial is there's a lot of issues coming up on the pike, and significant issues and really complex legal issues, and also a lot of new activity just in the past couple of weeks with respect to some information that came out about a juror, with respect to a motion for a mistrial and potential hearings relating to that, a federal indictment of all 4 officers, and of course the trial of Lane, King, and Tao, which has now been rescheduled to March 2022. So there's a lot of interplay going on between all of these issues.
So let me tell you what my feeling about the Chauvin trial was, and you get into it. So one of the things I noticed, now that I'm 58 years old, I actually have,
Look great.
Thank you, but I actually have historical reference points. I can think of other trials other than, and one of the things that I've noticed in the Chauvin trial more than any similar thing in my entire lifetime is that there was no contrarian opinion out there all the time. So, for instance, during the OJ trial, now we knew OJ was guilty. We knew it even before the trial started, and he had, decapitated. This was at least as horrendous or equally horrendous as to what Chauvin was accused of. And yet, in between the courtroom sessions, you'd have experts on CNN poking holes in the prosecution's case, saying, well, this was weak. Nobody would accuse him of being sympathetic to OJ or sympathetic to murder or whatever it is, but just on strictly like, what about this? What about that? Maybe that's weak.
I mean, if there was video of OJ cutting off her head, it might have gone a little differently.
No, I don't. I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that's what I'm. So, for instance, KSM is another one. When KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who was, the 9/11 terrorist, when it was talking about trying him, the ACLU was very, very vocal about the flaws in the arguments against him and whether she stuff like that. And it is true that from time to time people would accuse the ACLU of being sympathetic to terrorists, but that kind of criticism came from kind of like the ignorant right wingers. Enlightened people understood, no, the ACLU exists for civil liberties, and civil liberties are most easily ignored when you have unpopular defendants. So that's you. So when there was an unpopular defendant, that was normally when liberals kicked into high gear, and that didn't happen with the Chauvin trial. So you have any comment about all that? Because that bothered me.
I hate to break it to you, because I know you said you wanted to debate me about something, but I very much agree with you. I think a lot of the coverage on many networks ignored all of the defense points of view. Now, just so you know a little bit more about me, since it's the first time, and by the way, I'm honored to be on your show. I'm really excited to be here. I'm a big fan. So I thank you.
We treat you way nicer than we treated Raanan. Go ahead.
You're a fan of the show or a fan of the Comedy Cellar?
I love the Comedy Cellar, and I've listened to a bunch of your shows. I heard Andrew Yang on your podcast. I think you guys do an excellent job of showing a lot of different viewpoints, and I love the show. And I love the Comedy Cellar. I like to go to is it the Olive Branch upstairs?
Olive Tree.
I'm going
to extend an olive branch.
Yes, exactly. But in any event, I do agree. I think that there was very one-sided coverage of the trial. And just so you know a little bit more about me, I'm a defense lawyer. So I truly believe that I don't care if you're an unpopular person. I don't care if everybody hates you. Everybody is entitled to a defense, and that's a cornerstone of our legal system.
Right.
So I'm not sure if you'd watched a lot of the coverage on HLN. It sounds like you watched a decent amount. HLN,
no, I only saw one interview with you, only one.
Cool, got it. So HLN is CNN's sister station, and we watched the trial gavel to gavel. And I will say, just not to promote, because I love the network, but there were opposing viewpoints on that network. I'm not sure it got as much attention as some of the other networks, but some of these stuff I heard coming out of media coverage. And I'm not going to identify people because I work with all these people on various networks, but something to the effect of, I can't believe the defense opened his closing argument by saying that the prosecution has to prove their case. That just means Chauvin's guilty. I was appalled.
Yeah.
I was appalled. That came from a formal federal prosecutor. I mean, there are certain aspects of criminal trials which are just the basics. And the first is the presumption of innocence and the fact that it's the prosecution's burden to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. So to say that it's simply not correct. And I don't think any attorney can really with a straight face say that that is a correct notion. Now, I think during the trial, look, I watched it every single day. I watched every moment of it. I thought there were moments where the prosecution did a really great job. I thought there were moments where the prosecution's case wasn't so good, and the defense could have really taken advantage of those moments. I thought some of the defense experts were really bad for the defense, unfortunately, for the defendant in that situation, because they really had some good stuff with respect to the prosecution's experts that could have capitalized on, and that was really a problem. And I say that, and please don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that he should be innocent or guilty. I respect a jury verdict. I think there was plenty of evidence to convict him.
Right.
It's up to the jury, just so all the listeners understand. The jurors hear all the evidence and they weigh what they believe to be the most influential, most important, what testimony they choose to believe, what testimony they choose not to believe. But I certainly don't think that it was a situation where the defense had no arguments, throw up your hands and leave. There were a lot of defense arguments with respect to use of force, and some of the medical testimony, which was extremely complicated, that I think could have resulted in a different situation. I wouldn't have been shocked by a hung jury.
Can I ask a question about
Sure,
the case?
of course.
I was reading about it and said when they brought up the possibility of him, the judge instructed the prosecution, if they brought up once again this possibility of the carbon monoxide or the fuel,
Correct.
that it could go into a mistrial, and I didn't understand what that was in reference to, how that would go into a mistrial.
Yeah, so towards the end of the trial, the prosecution actually brought out basically a document talking about carbon dioxide and the carbon dioxide in George Floyd's lungs at the time. And it was something that had not been disclosed.
From the exhaust pipe of the car.
Yes,
right?
from the exhaust pipe. And it had not been disclosed in advance to the defense. So essentially what the judge did was narrow the questions that the prosecution could ask to the witness on the stand, who was Dr. Tobin at the time, who was recalled in the prosecution's rebuttal case. So the judge said, you can ask him about this, despite the fact the defense did not have it in advance, but you can only ask this narrow pool of questions. And if you toe that line, there's going to be a mistrial. So it was a very serious admonishment by the judge that was done behind the scenes. Now, and I know everybody on here knows this, we cover cases in the media, but it's not really like Law and Order or whatever legal show that you want to think of. There's not these aha moments where somebody slaps a document or puts a witness on the stand that nobody's heard of that wins the case. Everything is disclosed in advance, and in fact, there's discovery rules which take away that element of surprise and are supposed to level the playing field. So that's why you heard that issue, and that's why it was such a serious.
You actually can't have those aha moments.
Yeah, if you have an aha moment,
that would be a mistrial.
Somebody didn't do their job.
Yeah.
But in the verdict,
Aha moments are frowned upon. Look, I thought Nelson, was that the guy's name? Nelson?
Eric Nelson, yes.
I thought he was just awful. I know you,
yeah.
just awful. And I'm going to tell you why. You tell me what I'm missing. So, as I watched the expert testimony, there was Tobin, that he was who basically, and please correct me if I'm wrong because I didn't watch it that carefully, but I think I'm right, although some of it I might just be remembering wrong already. Tobin was essentially said, this hold would have killed anybody, even an able-bodied person. It had nothing to do with all his pre-existing conditions. It had nothing to do with anything. You could have put Arnold Schwarzenegger under there with that kind of pressure, calculated to the 1/10 of a pound. That would have killed anybody. And then there was
even Arnold Schwarzenegger, 70-year-old Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Oh, I'm telling you, And then in the middle, there was an expert, I forget his name, which essentially said that, well, no, this is positional asphyxia. And, given the fact he had all these health conditions, blah, 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 this killed him. And then you had the guy, what's the name of the actual person who did the autopsy?
Oh, yes.
Baker?
Yeah, Dr. Baker.
Baker said, no, actually, this wasn't positional asphyxia at all. This was just all the stress of the situation and all his pre-existing conditions, and he finally just gave out. So in my mind, what you have there is 3 different experts, none of whom have the same opinion quite of why he died. And by the way, the first expert and the last expert have mutually exclusive opinions. And normally when you have 3 experts who can't agree on one thing, yes, they all agreed that Chauvin was responsible, but that's not enough, in my opinion. They all have to speak with one voice as to how it killed him, because there's a 4th option here, which is he had a lethal dose of fentanyl in him. And if Nelson had the balls to say to Baker, you say that there was a lethal dose of fentanyl, that you've seen people die of this amount of fentanyl in the past, and that if you'd found him alone with nothing else to go on, you would have thought he just died of fentanyl. How do you know he didn't die of fentanyl overdose? How do you know? And Baker would have to say, well, I just think it's unlikely. And they say, well, unlikely is not reasonable doubt. You have to prove that he did die of this. You have to prove that you know that he didn't die of fentanyl overdose. Otherwise, that's what we call reasonable doubt. And by the way, there was a guy in the car with Chauvin, with Floyd.
Mm-hmm. Maurice Hall,
who might know about whether he's built up a tolerance, whether this was more fentanyl he'd ever taken before in his life, or he took this amount every day. And the prosecution refused to give him immunity to testify. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, What do you think? If he had something to say that was going to be good for the prosecution, don't you think they would have given him immunity to testify? Why do you think they didn't give him immunity to testify? Well, it stands to reason they didn't give it to him because this guy was going to say something that might help Chauvin. So, and like you put all that together, he didn't make any of those arguments.
Yeah. So and that was very compelling, and I'm clapping because I feel
I'm
like,
right. No, look, I don't say the guy's innocent. I don't know. I don't think.
No. I mean, it's
there's a reasonable doubt standard.
Well, and the job of a defense attorney is to raise reasonable doubt, right? To poke holes in the prosecution's case and to identify the issues that would stick in the jury's mind, and they would say, "Look, I don't think I can convict on every element of this crime beyond a reasonable doubt."
And it is stupid for people to attack the defense attorney because everyone does.
Well, I think the problem is, it's really easy to look back and do the Monday morning quarterbacking and saying that somebody should have done X, Y, Z. A couple of points just based on the actual trial. There were some limitations to what Nelson could ask, and that happened in out-of-court proceedings before the judge, where what content could actually come out in front of the jury in these, ex parte, meaning outside of just with the judge and not with the jury, what they could actually talk about with each witness, what questions could be asked in the parameters of what was going to come into the courtroom. I agree. I think the point should have been made with Dr. Baker very strongly that it is extraordinarily rare for prosecutors to distance themselves from their medical examiner. That's the person for the state that conducts the original medical examination. And they were really kind of like, I guess we have to put this guy on the stand because we need the autopsy report, but it's bad for the case. So they tried to overshadow it with a lot of other experts. Dr. Tobin, I thought, was really, really compelling. Personally, as I watched him, I'm like, wow, he's matching up the pictures with matching up the video with all of these moments and explaining the medicine, and I'm really understanding it. But to me, I thought, well, this is strange. I think the prosecution is boxing themselves into this narrative where nothing else mattered, but being in a prone position. And I actually thought that would be to the detriment of the prosecution, and I reported on that because it just isn't consistent with some of the other facts. All of that being said, just quickly, and then I'm happy to hear what anybody thinks. This is the problem with cases that are really hinging on expert testimony, and it's what we call battle of the experts. And it's that a lot of experts are going to come out with differing opinions, and they're going to tend to cancel each other out in some way. And a juror is going to latch on to one expert or another, and as a defense attorney, you kind of hope that somebody has the same opinion that you do, that this doesn't make sense with this expert and that expert, and then you end up with either a hung jury or you end up with somebody who's a holdout on the medical causation, which was a primary issue in this case. But it seems like a lot of the jurors, and this is just from some of the post-trial interviews, they really, really decided Dr. Tobin. They felt that his testimony was the most credible. And again, that's really a big factor in a jury trial, that a battle of the experts is it's a tough case.
But
does it come down to, in the jury's mind, just a gut feeling?
Well, I mean, it seems like it'd be a bit of a coincidence to have a foot on someone, him saying, I can't breathe, and then that guy dies of an OD when
this
you're
is my
watching
point.
this thing happen.
This is
That's
my
kind of
point.
a pretty big coincidence.
First of all, I'm so happy you said it, because my next point is going to be, the whole case is based on coincidence, right? But two things. Do you know the case of Sicknick, the officer who died after the January 6th riot, insurrection, what do you call it?
Yeah.
So he was, first they said he got hit with a fire extinguisher. Then he said they got hit with his bear poison or pepper spray, whatever it was. And everybody was sure he died as a result of this. And then lo and behold, they find out there's a medical examiner report, and it says, no, he died of natural causes. He died of natural causes the day after getting all this violence on January 6th. That's a hell of a coincidence. And you know what? They were ready to convict somebody for that murder, if not for the fact that a doctor was ready to say, no, it actually was natural causes. Now that's a coincidence, but you know, it's not really that much a coincidence if you think about it. Dying an hour after you take a lethal dose of fentanyl. Wherever you are, after you take a lethal dose of a drug, that's where you're going to die. That's not, and if you happen to be under someone's knee, it's a coincidence that you're under someone's knee, but the dying.
The stress of being under someone's knee plus the fentanyl.
But compared to the Sicknick thing, I mean, that was weighed on me. It's like, well, holy shit, this Sicknick coincidence is huge. But that's what happens when you don't prove somebody did something.
Right.
I mean, when you have a foot on someone and they say they can't breathe and he doesn't put the foot off that entire time, it does feel like murder.
No, because wait, Misty, I'm sorry. Because what we know now, which we didn't know earlier, was that he was saying, I can't breathe as soon as they came upon him. Is when he was in the back of the car, he was saying, I can't breathe. When they tried to get him to sit down in the car, he was saying, I can't breathe. And he probably was having trouble breathing. Mm-hmm. But that could have been, that is not inconsistent with drug overdose, right?
He made it really hard to breathe.
Maybe yes, maybe no.
Autopsy said asphyxiation.
Right, let Misty.
No, I think that just, and everybody's points are very valid. And this is actually a very good showing of what goes on in the jury room, right? And this is what generally does go on with juries, is that there is this debate about these facts and how they apply to the law. But in this particular case, well, in this case, there was only 10 hours of deliberation, but I'm saying in general, that's what you usually see, that there are jurors that have different opinions about the facts and whether or not that applies, how that applies to the elements of the case and how that applies to the law. What I want to make the point about, and this is a sheerly legal point, outside of just, everybody's seen the video is horrible. The video really carried the day, I think, for the jurors. And that was my opinion on the end result. And I understand why it was difficult to watch that day in and day out. Absolutely, it's terrible. But one of the critical elements in any criminal case is the jury instructions. What do the jury instructions say? Because that is the roadmap that the jury has when they go into the room and they talk about the facts and how it applies to the law and whether the prosecution fulfilled its burden. And in this case, the jury instruction said that Chauvin has to be what's called a substantial factor. He doesn't have to be the only factor. And that's the way these particular jury instructions were written. Now, Eric Nelson had lobbied for jury instructions which included an instruction about superseding cause, meaning that something else comes up in between whatever the act is and the death, and that's the cause of what happened. Now, the instruction ended up being a little bit more pro-prosecution. And I think that makes a huge difference because, again, these are complicated legal concepts that are being diluted into, here's the elements and here's how you apply the law. And that substantial factor causation really left a window open to say, even if there might be all of these other competing factors, if you believe that this was a substantial factor in George Floyd's death, then you can convict with respect to causation, which applied to all three charges.
Misty, what do you?
I gotta go. I'm convinced by that, but I gotta go.
Wait. Okay. Well, if you go now, I'm really going to talk about you. Go ahead, Dan.
Okay, I'm in a rush. But thank you all. It was a fun conversation. I appreciate it. Bye.
Nice to meet you over the screen.
You get extra spots this week, Raanan. Go ahead.
We get free food tonight. We used to pay our podcast guests, by the way. We stopped doing that.
Go ahead, Dan.
Anyway. Well, you're paying and having such a good time conversing with everybody.
Come in and find us and eat and drink.
But Misty, how would do you think that a trial by jury is the best way to render a fair and a correct decision? If you had to design a system, would it be a jury trial? Look, I mean, how really good are these? I mean, it's not 12 Angry Men, generally speaking. What goes on in these jury rooms?
Great point. I mean, I'm not in the jury room, but as practicing lawyers, what we try and do is talk to juries after verdicts, and you get a sense of what people gravitate towards, what they care about. And I'd say it's very unpredictable. Look, I personally, I believe in the system. And I think that there are certain cornerstones, like I said, the prosecution has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt and the presumption of innocence. I believe that you get 12 people who can go in and can be impartial and can make a determination. I cannot think of a better way. I truly do believe in the system. I'm not saying that means it's without flaws, right? Because there's never going to be something that's perfect. But when you're talking about somebody's liberty, there has to be a system in place that there's nothing left to one person to decide.
But other countries do have like where one person decides, right? Sometimes it's a judge trial.
You can have a bench trial, but that's something you could elect to do.
Do you think the results are better that way or with the jury?
I think it's a very strategic choice, and it depends on the facts. And that's always going to be the case, because look, there's discrete legal issues that you might say this is better left to the judge. Now, I'll give you an example. In the Chauvin trial, the aggravating factors. So after Chauvin was convicted, the prosecution made a motion for what's called aggravating factors, meaning that Chauvin could get a higher sentence than what is in the sentencing guidelines. Chauvin could have had a jury decide on that, but instead elected the judge. And I think that was probably the right move, because even though it was ultimately not successful for him, they are discrete legal issues, and you might get a judge who can detach from the facts and have a less sympathetic view. But in general, a jury trial is going to be a better case for the defendant, because think about all the different outcomes.
Yeah.
A hung jury, you can have a conviction on one charge as opposed to the lesser charge as opposed to the highest charge. There's many, and you can have an acquittal. And so I truly believe in the system, and I believe in the system being fair, and that's what part of the problem that I had with this trial is that I do think there's some judicial error that could call the jury verdict into question that happened throughout the trial on appeal. And look, and I also, my other issue, and I'm not saying I think the result was wrong. I just do not think outside influences, public opinion should ever have an impact on a jury. And I think to say so is really reckless.
So Misty, so
sorry, I'm off my soapbox.
No, there's a lot there. And by the way, but one thing I noticed, and I talked to a lot of smart people, and one thing I've noticed that they have trouble getting or internalizing, not because it's a high IQ concept, but for whatever emotional reason, is the notion that the state has to prove it, as opposed to it was a coincidence, or and this is happening over and over again. And the other point that people seem to have trouble with is that it doesn't matter whether he's guilty or not. The point is to have a fair trial. And right. It's very, very hard for people to process that I might say, listen, I'm not saying whether he's guilty or not. That's not actually what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned that there's a lot of things about this trial that don't seem proper. And so leaving that, let me go through them. But just one other thing I just wanted to, when you said battle of the experts, what I think was unique about this and where the defense dropped the ball was that usually it's experts on opposite sides. But I think that they really should have hammered home that the prosecution had experts with mutually exclusive opinions. And that, I think, is devastating to the idea of beyond a reasonable doubt. If the prosecution, with all its resources, can't find two experts that have the same conclusion about what happened, if every one of them shades differently, I mean, if you go to 3 different doctors and you get 3 different opinions, all of them say you're sick. All of them but one person says it's this, one person says that. You're not going to have, you couldn't possibly say that any one of those doctors convinced you beyond a reasonable doubt. That's just not what if they all said the same thing, you say, I'm convinced. So that's that. So
yeah, I think you make a good point. And I will say just very, very quickly, and then on to the next, but and many times if you talk to jurors, you'll hear them say that the most influential part of the trial to them from a defense perspective is that closing argument, where those types of points are made and hammered home.
And he didn't hammer.
Synthesize the information, over the course of weeks and weeks.
Wait, and he spoke way too long. He literally shouldn't have spoke more than 45 minutes. But let's go through the issues that I think.
One thing I've noticed from the dawn of the internet age, the dawn of social media age, is that people, and it's been said over and over again, people don't change their minds. We've seen it over and over again. No matter what you say, what arguments you make, people stick to their own positions. I mean, that's something that's, that we see on social media all the time.
Right.
Jurors are no different. If you're going in there with a Chauvin is guilty mindset, and everybody, of course, was aware of this case. I mean, is there any way to sway people? And is it,
Well, so that's why there's such a extensive voir dire process, because the idea is that in a case like this, there's not a place on the planet that you haven't heard of this case, right? I mean, this is the most high profile case. So you're not going to have people who say, oh, Derek Chauvin, who's that? who's George Floyd? No, that's not realistic. But the reason you go through the juror questionnaires, the reason that you go through the voir dire process, that you have the extensive questioning, is that you hope to find jurors who, even though they might know about the case, they can be impartial and put whatever they know or have learned aside and be fair and focus on what comes out in the courtroom. I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not saying any attorney is such an amazing mind reader to know that you actually get those fair and impartial people who can truly put their preconceived notions aside and really focus on what happens, because the only thing that matters is in that room.
Can anybody, I mean, Jonathan Haidt, who was a guest on our show a couple years ago, wrote a book about how just basically most people just don't change their minds once. And so the question is really anybody, is it even possible?
No. How about Casey Anthony? You know what I mean? Like the most hated, one of the most hated people at the time that her trial was going on. And I don't know, whatever. I can't pretend to get into the minds of jurors, but I do think that oftentimes when you go into the courtroom, or I will say, for when I watch a trial and I try and approach it impartially, and I actually try and put aside the fact that I'm a defense lawyer, so I look for certain things. You're surprised at what you hear when the actual evidence comes out, as opposed to what you might hear or read in an article or see on TV. So my point is, I think it's possible, and I think that you do your best to get a fair and impartial jury who can put aside any of those preconceived notions to focus on the true task. And I do think most jurors, and I can't speak for everybody because obviously there's always an outlier, most jurors do take their duty seriously and want to dispense justice, whatever that might be.
Let's go through the issues that I find troubling. First is, I think the idea of substantial, what's the wording of the statute? It has to be a substantial cause?
Substantial factor.
All right, I find that on its face to be a unconstitutional standard, vague. Nobody can tell me what it means. 12 jurors would have 12 different ideas of what the word substantial means. It's a word without a definition. It could be 50%, less than 50%, 10%, 90%. And how do you prove something that you can't define? How can you put somebody, how can you get the death penalty on somebody for an adjective like substantial?
Well, and that's part of, there's been a lot of arguments about this, just with respect to even the terms beyond a reasonable doubt, that no one can really truly define what it means. It doesn't, and you'll hear a judge say it doesn't mean no doubt. And so, yes, it's true. Some of these terms are very vague. And oftentimes what a trial attorney will tell you is that you define the word the best you can based on the statutory language, and that's what's going to be in those jury instructions. And that's not made up. That's something that comes from the statutes. But what it ultimately ends up meaning is whatever those 12 jurors, if they come to a consensus, want it to mean or think it.
I don't like it. It should be but for. But for, I understand. If it hadn't happened, he wouldn't be dead. I don't understand a substantial thing. Anything could be substantial.
Well, but for could just be, you said hello to him and he looked towards you and got hit by a car. That's a but for. But you can't say that somebody's.
No, I'm saying that I understand what but for means. Yes, it could mean that. Yeah, I understand that, but I don't understand what a substantial factor means in the sense of someone's guilty or not guilty. Anyway, that's the first thing. Second thing is, how could they, if this was not an example of a case where a change of venue was appropriate and a case where sequestration of the jury was appropriate, can you give me an example of a case where those concepts belong?
I actually can't. I think this was the prime example of a case where sequestration or change of venue was appropriate, and I'll tell you why. And I think that there were several opportunities for Judge Cahill to correct what might have been wrong from the beginning. Because, first of all, if you recall, obviously a change of venue was asked for right at the very beginning, right? The judge said no. The argument's made that there's publicity and you're not ever going to get away from publicity. But there's a second piece to that argument. That's one factor. And that might be true. You're not going to be in a place where there isn't publicity regarding this case. But the other factor is that the jury pool is going to be directly affected by the outcome of this trial, and that there could be fear and trepidation to not conform to what public opinion is. To me, that is the most egregious and prejudicial factor, because you want to have a jury that's going to go in there, listen to the evidence, and make a determination based on that evidence. So strike one for the judge on that factor, which I think is going to be pretty prevalent in an appeal. Well, then you also have, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
But anywhere in America, the jury might face, prejudice if they didn't convict.
And you make a good point but the argument is that this is, first of all, the epicenter of where there was a lot of upheaval after George Floyd died, protests that turned violent, that this would directly impact the jurors' businesses, friends, family, and that they simply would not want to go against public opinion. The other piece is that outside the courtroom every day, the jurors are walking through George Floyd Square, which is, it's fine to have a memorial like that, understandable, and then that's up to the public. But if you change the venue and move it to somewhere where you're not in the epicenter, you're not in the city, then you might have a better shot. And I don't mean that there couldn't be problems there too, but that would have been step one.
Well, there could be problems, but it's less. It
might be less so. You have a less of a chance of it being an issue.
I always felt my whole life that the defendant should get the benefit of the doubt. So we can't be 100% sure by changing the venue we solve all these problems. But why not change the venue when we know for sure that these problems are going to exist in Minneapolis? And by the way, the jurors' names are going to become public. People are there. Their friends live in the same town that might be the victim of destruction. Should there be rioting or whatever it is, that's less likely removed from the city or that city. I mean, there's some. I mean, all you have to do is put yourself in the position of the defendant and say, would I think it's really fair for them to try me with a bunch of jurors whose names are going to come public? And I can't separate it in my mind. Maybe I should, from the idea of sequestration, because you have a judge there who's going through this performative thing of what evidence can come in and what evidence can come out, shouldn't come in, and what evidence is prejudicial. And then the jurors go home and they read it all online.
Right. And look, they're not supposed to, but you can't, the argument now is that you say don't watch TV, but you can't look at your phone without something popping up and giving you the news of the day.
This is the point I was going to make. Sequestering juries was a concept that came out of the 40s and 50s, right? When I think is that when it was hard to get information, you would think in the modern age, we'd have 100 times more juries sequestered because of the internet, because of social media.
I agree. And I think that, first of all, the change of venue, the second issue is not adjourning the case when a $27 million landmark settlement came out during jury selection, huge problem. Then not to sequester the jury when Dante Wright occurred. There were significant issues in that city, kind of foreshadowing what could happen at the end of this trial. There was obviously the comments by Maxine Waters. There's a whole host of issues there, and really that all boils down to what's called judicial error, and that's going to be a big factor on appeal. And even Judge Cahill, with respect to Maxine Waters, said, "Hey, you might have an appellate issue." And was for the first time pretty salty about the fact that you had a politician making these statements that there is a right answer. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing to me. There's a right answer. There's only one right answer, and it's to convict on all the charges when the jury's not sequestered. Look, all of that I think is really good. There are great appellate arguments. And then there's another piece to the appellate arguments, which is that these issues are cumulative, that any one of these issues might not stand alone and be enough, but all of these issues together may actually be an appealable issue. And I will say, no judge wants this. Everybody wants a jury verdict to be a fair verdict. Nobody wants a verdict to be overturned. Because you want to go in there with that fair trial, and that you've got a jury pool that's fair and impartial, and that verdict is going to be preserved. The idea of appellate court is not to second guess a jury verdict.
So here's another thing, and we're going to run out of time soon, but I did some research into this. Apparently, this felony murder rule in Minnesota, which
very rare,
which does because it doesn't have a merger doctrine where
right, no independent felony.
where an assault is not in most progressive areas, this would not be a felony murder charge, because if it's an assault, it can't become part of a felony murder. And this is typical of what I was saying in the beginning. And civil liberties groups and progressive lawyers have always thought that this was uncivilized that we had such laws. And yet you saw people who spent their whole careers being disgusted by this type of felony murder law, cheering or just neglecting to mention that their entire career they had thought this was an unjust law. And now they're saying, oh yeah, good for him, you know?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that the law in Minnesota, it's so unique, and it doesn't make sense to me, because what murder isn't a felony murder if assault can serve as the underlying felony? Then every murder is a felony murder, right? So usually it would be, the prime example is you rob a gas station, somebody gets killed in the process. The underlying felony is the robbery, and then it becomes a felony murder. That's typical. No, this is a very unique, very, very unique law. Minnesota, which I learned, which I'm not an expert in Minnesota law by any means, but there's a couple of rules in Minnesota that I would say are very unique to that jurisdiction.
And let me add to the people listening, because I know that this kind of conversation gets mad, especially when lawyers have them. We might be oblivious because we did this in law school, and but if you could just make the analogy in your mind to the exclusionary rule that everybody knows about, where like if evidence is gathered improperly, that evidence is thrown out, and quite often that leads to a guilty person going free. And we've all kind of learned to accept that, because the fairness of everything is supposed to be more important than the outcome. And that's really all we're saying here, is that I don't think any of us certainly none of us thinks that Chauvin was innocent. And we're all probably close to thinking he was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But having said all that, these issues, if you imagine these same issues, like if it was the trial of the Central Park, the kids accused of the Central Park rape of the jogger in the 90s, people would understand these issues right away. You mean there was somebody who saw the thing who wasn't given an immunity, and they didn't, and that might have said something to defend those kids, and they weren't allowed to testify? We'd be outraged at that, you know. And you can take every one of these issues and just imagine it through a case that you're sympathetic to, and every one of them would anger you. But it's not supposed to matter which way you feel about the case, because they're all supposed to be considered innocent. But that's very hard for people to internalize. Correct?
Yeah, I agree with you. It can be a very difficult concept, and you tend to gravitate towards something you agree with, as opposed to think about it critically from different perspectives. I think that's human nature.
What do you say, Dan? Dan?
I was about to ask Misty if she's familiar with Ben Shapiro.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not she agrees with me that Noam is...
Oh, stop with it. Listen, you're complimenting me by comparing to Ben Shapiro?
Not imperfect, but certainly a lot more intelligent, logical, and coherent than Ben Shapiro.
Ben Shapiro is very, very smart. He's a prodigy, you know. But Ben Shapiro is mean.
Well, I don't know if he's smart. He's not showing it with a lot of the stuff that he says.
Agreed. I agree with Dan.
Maybe because he's biased and
you don't listen to Ben Shapiro, Periel. I listen to him.
So I've actually done Ben Shapiro's show before a couple of times.
He's a very smart.
He's very, very smart. He's very intelligent. And I will say that my experience has been he is open to other. There's no world where he cuts you off or doesn't allow you to express your opinion. And so you can agree, and reasonable minds can disagree on many things.
Well, that's nice, because I've listened to plenty of fucking bullshit and hard things that he said that have been appalling, frankly.
First of all, he talks like he calls Biden doddering, and he talks about Nancy Pelosi's dentures and stuff like that. I don't like that kind of thing. And
horrible things about gay people, just disgusting things I've read that he said.
I don't know about that, but so he can be mean. Second of all, he made an argument the other day. If we want to talk about Ben Shapiro, I don't know. Missy wants to talk about Ben Shapiro. Never mind, because she has a relationship with him. But he made an argument about race the other day that I found very, very weak. I'll talk about it on next week's show. I don't want to put Missy on the spot.
No, that's okay. Like I said, by no means I don't think there's anybody on the planet that I agree with everything they say. I very much someone who thinks for themselves, but
Well, he was making an
I'm
argument.
open to hear opinions.
He was making an argument about Black people in America. And look, I'm pretty conservative on a lot of issues like that. But he harped on the fact that Black people were more successful and had a better standard of living in America than they do in any other country in the world. And I found that to be a very poor argument, because Black people have the right to expect to be treated the same as anybody in America. They don't. I mean, who gives a shit if Black people are treated worse in some poor country or in Africa like that? Is that mean a Black person is supposed to protest for his rights less vociferously because he's supposed to be appreciative of the fact that he could have been born in Africa? I found it to be a very tone-deaf argument, not helpful at all, and I was just surprised to hear it coming out of his mouth, and maybe it does betray a certain worldview, which is troubling of his. I don't know. I there was something else he said too, is not coming to mind, but that sort of thing where an argument which if it was coming the other direction, he would have no problem seeing the flaws in it. From time to time, I hear it coming out of his mouth, and it bothers me about him.
There's so much room for reform in the world, and we got to work towards it. I agree with that. I'm part of a lot of diversity and inclusion committees. I'm a partner at a law firm. We're trying to all do our part.
Yes.
Well, I'm not trying to do my part. I'm just doing jokes about irrelevant things.
So now
I didn't know that I knew him, so fair.
What do you think? What do you think the odds are of this case being overturned on appeal, and how much do you think the worry about the public outcry will impact that?
So, first of all, the first step is right now there's a motion for a mistrial, which goes before Judge Cahill. That's going to result in a hearing. And the root of that is there's 8 reasons why the defense moved for a mistrial, and it's not unusual for the defense to move for a mistrial. There's not a case where they don't. Right. All of the arguments that we just talked about, they were all set forth, as well as some others, but the most problematic argument for the prosecution in this is juror number 52, Brandon Mitchell, and the fact that this photo came to light where Brandon Mitchell is wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt, and that it's at odds with his responses on a jury questionnaire. Now, just to give everybody a little bit of context, we're seeing this issue play out also in the Scott Peterson case. Everybody probably remembers this case. It happened a very long time ago, the murder of Lacey Peterson and her unborn baby. Where this very same issue is on appeal right now, that a juror did not disclose pertinent information about a prior domestic violence offense on her jury questionnaire. And the appeals court is sending it back to the trial judge for a hearing on whether or not it's going to result in a new trial. I would say that this issue... Pardon me?
A new trial for Scott Peterson?
Possibly. He's already getting a new penalty phase.
God.
So the death penalty has been overturned.
That's insane. That guy should be tossed in the river and cut his head off.
And Periel, and you say that, and you know what? Many agree, but this just shows how severe this issue with potential juror misconduct is. That you can have a case like that. You can have a case with that type of evidence, and that verdict and that conviction can be vulnerable because of a juror not being honest on it.
That means he walks free. That means there's another trial.
That means there's another trial. And the issue with Scott Peterson is there's a bunch of new evidence they're going to seek to admit if he does have a new trial.
I mean, that I followed that case so closely. I mean, that guy is just absolutely.
Well, if that's the case, then he'll be convicted at a second trial.
Well,
maybe. But one thing I always say, and a federal judge said, I can't take credit for it because a federal judge said this to me like 10 years ago when I was much more junior in my career. He said, a jury is an honest roulette wheel. That's what I will give you. You will select a jury, you will have the process will be honest, but at the end of the day, it's unpredictable. And that's what it is. And that's why no one wants these verdicts to be vulnerable because of these issues. Now, right. I have a whole thing about how did somebody not find this,
right?
This picture before jury selection. I mean, right now with the amount of information that's on the internet about every individual, the lawyer is not doing their due diligence if they're not fully vetting in these issues. Something like this isn't coming to light sooner. Than,
politically speaking, though, it's possible to throw away this verdict. I just can't imagine. Given
So let me show everybody. This is the picture. This is the This is the picture. Can you see it?
Yes.
That's the juror, correct, Misty?
Correct.
So now imagine you're on trial for your life, and you find out that one of the jurors was wearing a T-shirt, essentially about the fact that you were guilty before the trial ever started. That doesn't sound very American to me. That sounds like the kind of thing people who complain about the justice system complain about.
Well, but the true problem, and look, that picture might exist, and that juror could have still been selected. The problem is with the responses on the jury questionnaire that are not accurate and not true. So
if with eyes open, it's different, but it wasn't eyes open.
Correct. So that's where that's going to be the single strongest argument. Look, do I think that Judge Cahill is going to grant a mistrial? Personally, I do not. Do I think that these issues could be very, very novel issues in an appellate court? Yes, I do. And, obviously the world is imperfect, but if the system works the way it should, an appellate court judges should not be considering the political consequences or the public fervor or any public opinion in making their determination. There's some lawyers who say that this case, if it goes up on appeal, and I'm not saying I necessarily agree, I've heard some experts say this, some people that I work with, could potentially go up to the Supreme Court. Why do they say that? Because this issue of how we deal with publicity in a world where the law is always a little bit behind technology. This is something that we've been dealing with for a long time. My friends laugh at me because I'm walking around going to a dinner with like 3, wheel bags of documents, like, oh, we still use paper in my field. But as an aside, how are courts going to deal with these issues? And do we need to establish some new rules in order to deal with these high publicity trials? I don't know if that's really going to happen.
Bill Maher with the new rules.
What's that?
I say Bill Maher, the new rules. But in any case,
yeah, these are really serious. That is the one, to me, I think the most, the issue that would be the most prevalent. And again, there's the argument that all of these issues together constitute what's called a cumulative effect, and that's why it could be an appellate case.
That juror thing bothers me. I mean, look, the flip side of this is not actually a legal issue, but it is worth saying that thank God for these body cameras and video cameras, because there is no way that this cop would have done anything but filled out a form and gone on with his life if not for video cameras. And we can
I agree. Yeah.
only imagine.
We know what happened. I mean, look, there's no, I talked about this during the trial. How often do you have so many cameras from so many different angles? We've got all the body cam videos. We've got the cameras across the street. I mean, there wasn't a doubt about what happened. There's not going to be an argument about the actual incident that occurred. The question is, how do the facts apply to the law? That's a different issue, but you're absolutely right. There's no room to say, oh, that's not the way it happened. No, it is.
Can you imagine how much abuse there was routinely? Not forget about murders, just, beatings and all kinds of stuff before cops had the reasonable expectation that they might be being filmed.
Yeah.
I mean, really, it's changed. It's probably prevented more suffering than any other change in law enforcement ever has, and we don't even realize it. It's so. Anyways, I mean, I don't know. I'm happy that he was arrested, and I'm happy there's a trial. I just wish that that this trial didn't have these issues, and they are issues. I know this makes people mad, but they really are issues. And in any law school class, if this was a law school hypothetical final exam, every single student would have identified these issues and considered it an easy exam. Like they're so blatant. If only you have the courage to say it out loud, right?
Yeah, and I think that, look, I look at it from a sheerly legal perspective. I'm human. The video is traumatizing. I think it's awful. But I truly believe in every person, popular, unpopular, no matter who you are, your right to a fair trial, and that has to be preserved.
Yeah. All right.
That is a great way to end, I think. Misty, I think you put a nice little bow on this thing, and why don't we stop there? Because it has been an hour and a half.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. Well, not with you. No, because we were ranting and raving with Raanan Hershberg before you got here.
Misty, I sent you some links in the chat. You see that?
Yes, I do.
Can you copy them and paste them into your own thing so you have them? Because I don't know. These are I don't even say these are some scientific studies that I found. I don't know if you've seen these, but these are really disturbing. But I don't want to talk about them. Yeah, just copy the links so you have them, or I can.
In any case, the Comedy Cellar reopen. Do you have a Vax card? I know that you do. Bring it on down. Starting June 1st, we will be at full capacity. Obviously, you got to make a reservation because we do sell out. And if you don't have a vaccine, then I guess you're not going to see shows at the Comedy Cellar. So if you're not vaxxed, that's another motivation to get vaxxed. Podcast at comedycellar.com for comments, suggestions, queries, and constructive criticism. And I guess that is it. We thank Misty Marris for joining us. And I guess you can follow her on Twitter, I would imagine.
Yep, Twitter and Instagram. Misty Marris Esquire.
Misty Marris Esquire. ESQ or the full word?
ESQ.
ESQ, Esquire. And Periel Aschenbrand, On My Knees, available on Amazon. And the only bush I trust is my own. Thank you, everybody. We will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you, Misty.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you so much.
Come to New York. You're not in New York. Where are you? In Florida?
I am a New Yorker. I'm right downtown.
You also come down to the club.
I'll come anytime.
This weekend.
You know what? I'm in town. I would love to come.
I'll email you tomorrow.
Please do. Email me. I would love that.
You look like such a Midwesterner. I assumed you were nowhere near New York.
No. I'm a New Yorker.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I can't wait. Okay. See you later. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Buddy, thank you.